So hello and welcome back to the channel, and also welcome to another Project Cars 2 video. In today's video I'm going to be taking a little look at where to start as a beginner to the game, not necessarily into the career options, but just where to start with all the menus. Obviously there's loads of things to select when it comes to the configuration, selecting pit strategies to turning your headlights on. But this is a fantastic game, and at the moment I don't think there's very much that will rival it on console. I know we're obviously all waiting for Project Cars 3 to appear, but that's probably going to be late into next year, if pushing it into the 21. Not sure where the development is at this stage, but I just wanted to give newcomers to the game a little bit of an easier journey into what to do with all the settings and where to really start. So without further ado, let's get on with looking at how to make this game a little bit more authentic and get you in that driving seat. So let's get on with it. So then, let's have a look at all these menus. Obviously when we first launch into the game, you'll come up with the main screen. You can select all your custom races, browsing the online shop, and a few other things down the bottom. Private race, community events. Community events is definitely something to look in on, but we're going to move to the options section of the screen, and as much as there's the controls there, I think we'll start with the gameplay section. Now initially there's the steering assistance. Obviously if you want some assistance with your steering or your braking, you're pretty new to sim racing, some of those might be useful, but I would prefer to stick with the authentic. So if you've got traction control in the original car, you'll have traction control in the car in the game. If the car has ABS, that'll also be available, but you can choose to turn all these things off, or you can choose to turn them all back on again. But if you leave it in the authentic mode, you can choose to have these on or off within the car, and you can choose to select them or not. Opposite lock, all these things are just assistance type things. Damage you can choose to have on or off, mechanical failures and tyre wear. But at the end of the day, you can choose to, if you're actually running in like an online lobby and someone else has chosen to have damage on, whether you've chosen to have it off or not, the precedence will be set by whoever's hosting the lobby. Obviously we're going through all the fuel and stuff like that, but these are things that you're selecting for your own personal in-game, like your career. When it comes to looking in lobbies, these will all be pre-chosen for you really, so they're not really going to be an option as such, but if you can choose them in here, you can do. But I would generally select what I've got on the screen now. Obviously if you're new to the game, maybe having manual pit stops selected to on would be a good thing, or you could choose them just to be off. So you would actually pull into the pit and everything would be done for you. The pit limiter would be chosen and selected for you rather than having to select it. If you don't select the pit limiter, you will get a speeding fine for going through the pits, or you can often get black flagged and removed from the race. So moving across to the on-screen display, having the HUD up in full. You can choose this during the game, so it doesn't really matter what you select here, but obviously choosing to have the racing line on or off is going to be affected. Having the turn indicators on, it's going to show like an arrow on the screen as to what's coming up, but if you have the track map set to 1, you'll be able to see what's coming up on the left hand side of the screen, or where you even choose to select it. I will link another video just above on how to customize your heads-up display. Showing the lap information, again these all can be edited during your HUD-up display section, and choosing whether to have the cockpit wheel on or off is certainly something that you might want to choose if you sit like the videos showing below, just as close as I sit to the wheel. Sometimes it's nice not to have the on-screen wheel on, but in some of my videos I often choose, as you can see in this one, to have the on-screen video with the wheel in the screen as well, so you can see the hands on the screen. And sometimes I'll just produce a video without a camera showing what I'm doing as well. So that's a good one to choose, whether you sit close to the screen or not. Obviously, setting with multiplayer, you can see who you're racing against if you have the names on. And some of these engineers and the spotter proximity indicator are all worth having, just to give you a little bit of information as to who's around you during a race, especially if you're racing online. Now, even during this section, I am going to choose to have the pit box indicator on. Sometimes when I've been coming into the pits, I have noticed that, especially if there's a couple of pit crews out and you haven't actually been into the pit before, having that pit indicator on is certainly worthwhile when there's a lot of activity in the pit lane. Obviously, in this section, you can also adjust whether you want to see miles per hour or kilometers per hour, whether you're imperial or metric orientated. And the tutorial section usually gives you a little bit of information on how to select certain things if you are new to the game. So moving to the configuration section really, and the controls. There's obviously, you can see on the screen I'm using the McLaren GT3 wheel, although the Club Sport wheel's displayed. But you're going to want to come into this section to be able to calibrate your wheel if you're using a wheel, and I would certainly suggest calibrating your wheel to around 360 degrees, or if some people would prefer to adjust the wheel rotation within the game. But when you come to select it, it's quite easy to do, and this is from a previous video that I produced, where you can see just down the bottom corner my wheel, and you just turn the wheel full lock one way and select the button, and then just turn it a half turn or a quarter. I think it's a quarter turn. No, it's a half turn. I'm sure it's a half turn. And then you're just going to select the pedals, obviously the throttle pedal, brake pedal, but I'm not using the clutch pedal at the moment, so that's not going to be selected. Obviously with auto clutch, it's going to give you a little blip of the throttle as you change down the gears, which is very useful. And obviously you can use the manual gears if you wanted to. I don't know why you'd want to invert the gears, but some people would. But moving on, let's go to the next configuration section. So looking in the configuration section, you get all these dead zones for the steering wheel, and the steering sensitivity is certainly one that you want to remember. Now, when you're doing a default race and you cannot change the steering ratio within the car, it's often a good idea to come back to this menu, and you can increase it, I would say, to around the 70% section. So this is going to increase the steering input. So say if you turn a quarter turn of the wheel, if you turned it quite high up, it would be inducing almost a half turn of the wheel. So this is going to be effective if you're trying to increase your steering rotation with less input into the wheel. Again, if the car feels really twitchy and you've got a really short steering ratio, you could reduce this, but I would recommend only using this if you can't adjust any of the in-car settings through the tuning menu. So the rest of these I've got set to just no dead zone, and the braking's in the middle. It's all just 50-50 down the middle really, apart from the one at the bottom. Now when we look to set up the assignment keys for everything, there are a heck of a lot of keys that you can choose. And if, like me, you are also using a keyboard, which is compatible on Xbox One. I'm not sure if it's compatible with PlayStation, whether you can use a keyboard or not, but I'd certainly, going through all these selections, these are numerous keys that might be useful to you if you want to use them. I've got a few stickers that I put over the keys to show an indication as to what each key does. So for me, it's quite straightforward when I'm looking at the keyboard as to what sort of action I'm going to be getting. Now when I'm using the curves and stuff, just showing you here, it's quite easy just to press the button and change one of the keys functions, which I usually use if I'm using the Formula B or Formula A or X. I would use the curves buttons, or I would often use, if I'm not in one of those sorts of cars, I might change the brake bias to Y and X, so it's just easy to use during the race. and it's just on the wheel. I don't really tend to adjust anything else really on the move, but having things selected is quite useful. Again, if you choose not to run ABS or traction control, you can switch them on and off during the game as and when you please. Obviously if you've got things selected. Moving to the next one, generally I don't really look up and down. Obviously if you want to be able to cycle through the camera views, that's quite a useful one to select. But looking back as well, I generally just use the rear view mirror. But obviously we're going to want to be looking left and right, definitely, just to see if there's some cars alongside. And I would 100% want to be setting up seat forward, backwards, up and down. These are really useful keys to have assigned to the keyboard, especially when you're trying to find your field of view, which is something that you would do every time you get in and out of a new car, really. Moving to look at resetting the car, it's definitely worthwhile having that button available just in case you turn the car upside down during a race. And the cycle through the MCD is something that's going to be on the in-car really. When you're looking at the dashboard, you're going to be able to cycle through looking at your oil or your tyre temperatures and stuff. That's certainly something that if you're going to be sat in-car, I would recommend having that selected. And it can also give you a little bit more information that you don't actually see on the screen. To be able to cycle through the hood, you can change to have no heads-up display. You can choose to have a very light version, something that I'll also link in the section above just now, how to adjust and customize your heads-up display. And there's numerous other ones here, especially the car management one. That's certainly something worthwhile having, so that you can just press the button and you can choose select pit adjustments, or you can mess with the strategy, the game strategy, whether you're going to run a rich compound fuel or stuff like that. I won't say a compound, but a rich mixed. And these definitely, looking at the force feedback section, this is a whole rabbit warren really of settings depending on what wheel you're using. But for me, I'm using a Fanatec 2.5 base, and I used to run on raw, but since the recent update and a firmware update on my wheel, I spent a long time changing those, so it's definitely something that's a little bit more intricate, and there's plenty of other videos online. So moving to the graphical side of things, this all depends on whether you're actually using an Xbox One X, an S, or just a standard Xbox. Whether you're going to want to run enhanced visuals, or you're going to want to run the enhanced resolution, or whether you want to be looking at the frame rates. This is all going to depend, and a lot of these menu selections are going to depend on which console you're running. It's really quite labour intensive running everything on a standard Xbox, and there's certainly a number of things that I'm going to highlight on this section that I would choose to turn off if you're running just a standard Xbox. Obviously we all want to be looking at the best visuals possible, but sometimes that's at the expense of frame rate. So definitely looking at the exterior sun flare, I'd probably turn this off if I was running a standard Xbox. The heat haze is another one that I would certainly turn off. It's just a tiny shimmer on the horizon, but you really don't know how much of that's going to affect the frame rates. And I think if I was running a standard Xbox, I would rather have a good frame rate, a good solid frame rate, as opposed to having everything perfect graphics. Again, the raindrops on the windscreen, I think I would tend to turn this off. It's a gimmick really. And the vignette, I don't think I'd ever choose to have this on. I always wonder why you would ever want that on. It's just sort of darkens the edges of the screens. I wouldn't know why you would want that. Again, with the screen dirt, that's going to be something else I'd be thinking of turning off. And if you're also running in the cockpit itself, you could choose to turn the cockpit mirror off. But it depends what sort of view you're running as to whether you would like to turn that on or off yourself. But for me, these are the settings I'm using on my Xbox One X, and it runs at a really nice frame rate, and I don't really ever experience any sort of stuttering. So this next menu, the field of view menu, is really going to depend on which view you use. Generally I use cockpit view, and in all fairness I only use cockpit view. I've tried using the helmet camera, but I do find it quite weird as it moves towards looking at the corner, but it could be useful in certain areas, but generally I just stick with the cockpit view. Now there are some speed sensitive effects that you can add, and we'll look at movement in a second. But as for rear passenger, I don't think I'm ever going to be sat in the back of the car, but the minimum speed and maximum speed sensitivity is something that's going to be affected when you're driving and accelerating forward and braking. As you can see from the image above, just as I sort of come into a braking section, the car sort of moves back and forward as you sort of apply the brake and come off the brake pedal. And again, as you're sort of accelerating out, there's just like a sense of speed, a sense of acceleration. And this is something that took me a while just to get perfect, really, just so that when you're coming into the corners, you can see right to the end of the bonnet, you get a nice line through the corner. Moving on to look at the show helmet and G-force effects. These are certainly something that I'd definitely like to see in the game, just to give you that raw sense of speed. Moving on to the show helmet, helmet depth of field, helmet look to the apex and stuff. I do find this quite awkward to use, to be honest. I don't particularly use the helmet cam, and just prefer to use sort of more of a static dash camera, but I'd certainly suggest giving the helmet cam a whirl. It's certainly a good aspect of the game, and a lot of people do enjoy it because it gives you a bit of a sense of what corners coming up that you might not always see using the general camera. Leaning and stuff like that just gives it a bit of a feel as you're going into each corner, so definitely something to look at. Looking at the volume, master volume, I've just got this turned down a tiny bit, just because I use it with another game. I generally like to have my headset up at full whack, but there's a lot of noise in this game. It's obviously from the engines, from the music and everything, so certain things I do like to turn down. Obviously the player's engine, I want this to be at the maximum sound, and general car noises, wheel resistance and stuff like that, tyre volume. At the start of the game I thought the wheels really would screech and make a really horrible sound, so some of these things are just set just to make it a little bit more audibly friendly. Environmental sounds and general sound effects, certain things are just turned down that I don't seem to be I don't feel are as important as the audio from the engine. That's the main thing you want to be hearing out for, because they do help you in where you're going to be adjusting your handling for the car. As for the other two options at the bottom of the screen, allowing mixer for the headphones and the LFE, I'm not really sure what they're going to be doing, to be honest, but I generally have them on. So let's move on to whatever's next. Obviously looking at the TV calibration, that's going to be something you're just going to adjust your brightness and stuff for. But the system configuration for external applications is definitely something a lot of sim racers use, and I myself use a little tablet alongside which just links using the Wi-Fi, and this is the settings that I use in order to use especially RS Dash and the other app that goes with it, which I'm trying to think of right now just off the cuff, which is Crew Chief. Definitely a good app to keep with you. It's a bit more of an advanced spotter, but two apps definitely to look out for are Crew Chief and RS Dash. So just moving to look over a few other points of the game. Obviously if you're looking in the career mode, it really just isn't something that inspires me to want to play any driving game, to be honest. I generally just want to be racing against real life drivers, so most of my time has been spent racing online or doing community events, but certainly the career I'm sure has a lot to offer, especially if you're new to simulators or driving games in general. But for the most part, I do enjoy just building up my driver license and just taking part in online races and the community events. Obviously, you've got all the other things within the options, the affinity, cars that you drive the most. You've got all the images that I generally use for my YouTube channel, and then you've got all the videos. And one point I will just raise regarding the videos while I'm just clearing down what I've got there. Usually if you got over an hour's worth of video recorded, when you take part in your next online race or your next career race, you won't be able to record any more than about an hour. It'll just say failed recording. So one thing to remember is just to keep on top of that, just in case you have a really good race that you'd like to record, and it's a good idea just to keep those to a minimum. Save them somewhere else, do something else with them, put them on a hard drive. As you'll see from this replay that's about to come up, which I will add to the video, it's a very interesting idea as to, most of the online races will probably start just very similar to this one, unless you're taking part in actual league races. You always get those first corner shunts, and it can be quite disheartening, but if you stick with it, you can pull out some amazing wins and just really give you a sense of satisfaction. So I'll leave you with this replay. Hope you enjoy it, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from this. Consistency is definitely one of the main points when it comes to sim racing. You could set a fast lap, but if you can only set one fast lap and then you're struggling to set another fast lap, you're not going to get very far. So if you can be consistent, even if you're not the fastest lapper during the game, if you can be consistent and set good lap times consistently within a few hundredths of each other, you'll make for a good driver, that's for sure. So enjoy the replay, guys, and ciao for now. As you can see just up ahead, the front runner decides to take a little bit of a sneaky off-track excursion, trying to save him a little bit of time going through the little runoff there. Picks up a little bit of a time penalty and has to slow down for a certain amount of time before he's allowed to set off again. And then let's get back into the replay. Obviously I'm pushing fairly hard here, but I'm not pushing myself right to the limit where I'm needing to scrape alongside walls. And as you can see, obviously you take a wide line through there, but through here usually you could use a lot more of the circuit, especially get a lot closer to the wall on this section here. But I'm just allowing myself to run just nice steady lap times and just eking away at the lead. Yeah, just being consistent, that's one of the main things about driving any car really. Setting lap times, setting consistent lap times. So just as we approach the long straight here, I forget what it's called, this straight, but just up ahead you can see the number 1 car coming into the right-hander, and he just enters here with a little bit too much speed. I think he catches the inside curb a little bit and has a bit of a nightmare here, and he's probably just trying to think, oh, get going, and he just can't control the wheel spin, uses the reset button. By the time he's done that, we're coming around the corner at flat out speeds, and he's just picked up, I'm not sure if he's picked up a penalty, but he seems really slow setting off. I don't think there's any damage on this lobby, but you can see that he's just really pushing a little bit too hard now, just trying to catch up. He's realised he's made a massive mistake, lost lots of time, and he's just pushing too hard now. You can see the other cars sort of fighting over, trying to think whether they could get second place, but the number 2 driver, he does seem to be able to set quite a good lap time. He manages to keep with me fairly closely for the rest of the race, but in essence he's just throwing it away, to be honest, and it's just up to me to maintain consistent lap times now. So yeah, the moral of the story there, obviously if you crash out on turn 1 and damage is off, don't always expect to finish last. Just stick with it, you never know what's going to happen. Set consistent lap times and enjoy the game. Thanks for watching and ciao for now.